This is Dos Pequeños.
A funnier look at the paranormal in New Mexico, the world, and beyond.
I'm your co-ghost, Alex.
And I'm Eric. Hey there, spooky friends. Welcome to another
Spooky Sheet.
Yeah, we're here to tell you some ghost stories. But before we do that, thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Lisa, Dimitri, Katie, Carla. You all help us keep the lights on. We love you. We appreciate you. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/dospequeños and or ko-fi.com/dospequeños. Also, important thing to note is that we are actually going to start making some bonus content finally.
We really are.
Yeah, we've been talking about
We should shoot some today if we have time.
We've been threatening it for 3 years. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Let's get to recording.
Extra shout out to Deborah, who I just looked as a residual spirit supporter.
Residual. Yeah. So she's almost passed into the spirit realm.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. We love you. We love you all, and we appreciate you. Okay.
Yeah, even the $1. When you can join for $1 a month.
$1 a month, and you get early access to our episodes without ads. No annoying ads.
And like we said, soon to be coming bonus content
for the $5 and above too.
Yeah.
Alex, I believe you're going to be doing the spooky sheet for the month of May.
I'm going to be doing the spooky sheet.
Okay.
Hey kids. So I'm going to be reading from one of my favorite ones to read from, and that's the Tales of Terror, the Alfred Hitchcock collection. Now, did he write all these? No, he did not. I don't think he wrote any of them. But he decided what was scary, apparently.
Maybe he
what
curated it. We don't know.
Yeah, right. Well, this story is by John Coyne. It's called A Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, I saw that show. Movie.
I think it was a movie, right? Yeah. Like, I remember the movie. It was pretty scary.
I wonder if this is based on if the movie's based on this.
Let's find out.
Okay.
Are
you tucked in? Are you comfy cozy? Are you ready for story time?
Answer him.
Now. God damn it.
Michael remembered clearly the first piece of fungus.
Me too.
A thin, irregular patch 12 inches wide, grayish, like the color of a candle grease, growing on the new pine wall of the bathroom. He reached up gingerly to touch it. The crust was lumpy and the edges serrated. He pulled the resinous flesh from the wood, like removing a scab, tossed the fungus into the waste can, and finished shaving.
I'm sorry, is this erotic fan fiction that you're reading?
I kind of feel like it is.
Okay, go ahead.
He reached up gingerly to touch it.
Hot.
He had come up from the city late the night before, driving the last few hours through the mountain roads in heavy fog and rain, and arriving at his new cabin in the woods after midnight.
Ooh.
It was the first trip to the lake that spring.
How come he didn't get there at 9:15 in the morning?
Yeah, good question.
That seems like a more reasonable time.
Seems like a way more reasonable time.
Yeah. All right,
maybe he would have time to plan his whole day then.
Totally. He could do a bunch of things. He could go horseback riding if he wants.
He would have all the options. But no. Michael had come early in the week to work, bringing with him the galleys of his latest novel. He needed to spend several more days making corrections, and it was only the task of writing that he really enjoyed. The final step, when the book was still part of him, once it appeared between the covers, it belonged to others. He was in no hurry to read the galleys. Who the fuck are galleys?
I have no idea.
I thought I was reading it wrong at first.
I thought you were going to say gallows.
I did too.
Shit, this is getting morbid really fast.
That could be done at leisure over the next few days. Barbara wasn't arriving until Friday, and the guests weren't due until Saturday morning, and it was the weekend they had planned for several months to celebrate the completion of the new house.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
So, I hope people know what that line is from.
They have to.
It's the fucking most classic line.
They have to know.
Barbara! So while shaving the first morning at the cabin, Michael found himself relaxed and smiling. He was pleased about the house. Do you get relaxed and smile when you shave? I don't know. I haven't shaved in
I shaved my head, and
Did you really get relaxed, or do you cry?
It's like a electric razor. It doesn't affect my mood really.
That's good.
I'm just like, get this fucking shit done.
Yeah. Does it take a long time?
No, I do it every day.
It had been designed by a young architect from a nearby village. Local carpenters built it, using lumber cut from the pine and oak and walnut woods behind the lake. They had left the lumber rough-hewed and unfinished. The cabin was built into the side of the mountain with a spectacular view of the lake. Only a few trees had been cut to accommodate the construction.
Spectacular!
So from a distance and through the trees, the building looked like a large boulder that had been unearthed and tumbled into the sun to dry. I want the ambience rustic, Barbara explained to the architect. A sense of wilderness.
Hot.
She whispered the words as if to suggest the mysterious. Don't make it too austere. Michael instructed, I don't want the feeling we're camping out. This is a cabin we want to escape from the city. We want some conveniences.
We want glamping.
Yeah. I want a place that can sleep 8 or 10 if need be. He paced the small office and the architect as he listened to his requirements. Banging his new boots on the wooden floor, Michael liked the authoritative sound, suggesting to the kid that here was someone who knew what he wanted out of life. And cozy. Barbara leaned forward to catch the architect's attention. She had a round, pretty face with saucer-sized blue eyes, and she flirted with the young man to make her point. And a stone fireplace the length of one wall. Jesus. The whole wall? We may want to come up here with our friends during skiing season, she beamed.
I'd like a 37-foot fireplace, please.
Hell, can you have that much, like, wood in there and... I don't know. Anyway.
How could you keep that lit? Also, like,
how would it work?
Yeah. And what about the other walls in the other rooms? Like, okay.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
I want to see the plans.
Well, the architect looked from one to the other and said nothing.
That's the right reaction. He's, what the fuck is wrong with these people?
He's not one of your great talkers, is he? Barbara remarked as they left the village. Damn, Barbara. That's the way these mountain people are. They come cheap and they give you a full day's work. It's okay with me. I'd rather deal with the locals than someone from the city. Still, the cabin cost $10,000 more than Michael had expected. The price of supplies, he was told, had tripled to the country road.
Could it be the 37-foot fireplace?
It might have been the 37-foot fireplace. It might have put him over budget. Michael said that he wanted only to turn the key and find the place livable. I'm no handyman, he told the architect. And while the second home in the mountain was costly, Michael was no longer worried about money. When he had finished the new novel he had submitted to the publisher, it was picked up immediately with the advance of $50,000 more than he had made on any of his other books. The next week, it had sold to the movies for $200,000 and a percentage of the gross.
Okay, and we don't know what year this is.
No,
okay.
I imagine it's fairly old. Then, just before driving to the mountains, his agent telephoned with the news that the paperback rights had gone for $500,000.
Ooh.
So everything I touch is turning to gold, Michael bragged to Barbara.
I got the Midas touch.
I told you I'd make it big.
Yeah, Barbara, suck it.
Barbara. What he did not tell Barbara was that this was the worst book written only to make money. And he had used all the cliches of plot and situation that he had paid off. He finished dressing and made the station wagon was still packed with bags of groceries. And the night before, he had been too tired after the drive to do more than build a fire and pour himself a drink. And then carrying his drink, he had toured through the empty rooms, and his boots echoing on the oak floors, and admired the craftsmanship of the mountain carpenters.
Oh,
the cabin,
very nice.
The cabin was sturdy and well built.
Did he put his foot up on a
You know he did.
on a chair?
And he smacked one of like the wood beams
That's
or
not
something.
going anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good beam right there. I can tell. Is this oak? Is this oak?
It looks like it sounds like oak.
The cabin was sturdy and well built, and the joints fit together like giant Lincoln logs. The 3 bedrooms of the house were upstairs in the back, and they were connected by an open walk that overlooked the living room, which was the height and width of the front of the cabin. The facade was nearly all windows, long panels that reached the roof. One full wall was Barbara's stone fireplace, made from boulders quarried in the mountains and trucked to the lake site. The foundation was made from the same rocks, and as Barbara bragged to friends with newly acquired chauvinism, all that's not from the mountains are the kitchen appliances and ourselves.
Okay, first of all, classic Barbara.
Barbara, seriously. She does hold a good party.
But, like, I think we need a shirt that says, shut the fuck up, Barbara.
So Michael moved the station wagon behind the house and unpacked the groceries, carrying the bundles in through the back door and stacking the bags on the butcher block table. I always wanted one of those butcher blocks. He filled the refrigerator first with perishables and several bottles of white wine he planned to have evenings with his meals, and his own special present to himself at the success of his book. Packing the refrigerator gave Michael a sense of belonging. With that simple chore, he had taken possession of the place, and the cabin felt like home.
Can you do that to other people's houses? Like you just go in there and fill their fridge and this is my house now.
You make me feel like home. Yeah.
Hot.
He had thought of the evening staples until Barbara arrived, and she would have her own notion of where everything should go. But after the satisfaction of filling the refrigerator, Michael decided to put away the staples, beginning with the liquor. He carried the box into the living room and knelt down behind the bar and opened the cabinet doors. And inside, growing along the 2 empty plain wooden shelves, was gray fungus. It grew thick, covering the whole interior of the cabinet, and discovery frightened Michael. It's finding an abnormality. You know, don't they have, like, walkthroughs and inspectors and shit?
Yeah, they're supposed to.
My God! A shiver ran along his spine. He filled several of the empty grocery bags with the fungus, and it pulled easily off the shelves and was removed in minutes. He knew fungus grew rapidly in damp weather, but still the spread of the candle gray patch was alarming. He returned to the kitchen and apprehensively opened the knotty pint cupboards over the counter. The insides were clean, with the smell about them of sawdust, and he ran his hand along the shelves and picked up shavings. Michael closed the door inside.
That was a relief.
Barbara had given him a list of chores to do in the house before the weekend.
Barbara, man.
Fucking Barb. The beds in the guest rooms should be made. The windows needed washing. The whole house, from top to bottom, had to be swept. Also, the living room rug had to be arrived and was rolled up in the corner. It had to be put down and vacuumed.
Do we think she called herself Barb?
Barb. They call me B,
Barb.
the big B.
The big B.
First, however, Michael decided to have breakfast. On Sundays in the city, he always made breakfasts, grand ones of egg dormesse, crepes, of Swedish pancakes with lingonberry.
Jesus.
And lately, Barbara had begun to invite friends over for brunch, and his cooking had become well known among other friends, and his editor had suggested that he write a cookbook about Sunday breakfast.
Jesus Christ.
Michael unpacked the skillet and, turning on the front burner, melted a slice of butter into the pan, and he took a bottle of white wine, one of the inexpensive California Chablis, uncorked it, and added half cup to the skillet. The butter and wine sizzled over the flame, and a rich smell made Michael hungry of wine and butter. That's all he needed, wine and butter, and he's like, yep,
Delicious.
Time to eat. He broke 2 eggs into the skillet, seasoned them... What? He did? Into the skillet with butter and wine? Anyway, seasoned them with salt and pepper and searched for the shopping bags for cayenne. But Barbara hadn't packed the spices, and he could do without, but made a mental note to pick up cayenne and more spices when he drove to the village later that morning.
Mental note, yell at Barbara.
I have a feeling that Michael's not the one doing the yelling.
Yeah, I agree.
Although that's just kind of like our own narrative that we've painted for Barbara.
Mental note, don't tell Barbara about the cayenne pepper because she'll make me cry.
She'll blow it into my face.
Again.
Yeah, again. Michael moved easily and he like adjusts the shock collar around his neck. He's like, oh God, Barb. Michael moved easily around the kitchen, enjoying the same space to maneuver. In their apartment in the city, only one of them could cook at a time. Here, they had to put 2 stoves and 2 sinks and enough counter space for both to work at once.
2 stoves?
I mean, I guess if you had like an indoor grill and then a saute station, kind of like, or a big old
Or
flat
like a flat
top.
iron, yeah.
Flat top. I don't know about the 2 sinks. Maybe he's just trying to separate himself from Barb. Michael glanced at the eggs. The whites were nearly firm, and he took the toaster and plugged it in, noticing with satisfaction that the electrical outlets had worked.
Oh, thank God.
That was one less problem to worry about, and he dropped 2 pieces of bread into the toaster and then, going back to the bar, took the vodka, opened a can of tomato juice, and made himself a Bloody Mary. He was working quickly now, sure of the kitchen, and he cut the flame under the skillet, crumbled Roquefort cheese and sprinkled it onto the eggs, and then he buttered the toast and unpacked a dish and silverware. He smiled, pleased. He was going to enjoy cooking in the kitchen. Perhaps he thought he should move full-time to the mountains. He could write more, he knew. And if he lived by the lake, away from the interruptions and distractions, he fantasized a moment. He could see himself going down on cool, misty mornings to the lake, and he could smell the pine trees and the water as he crossed the flat lake to the bass fish before Joe. And he could see the boat gracefully arching through the calm water as behind, a small wave rippled to the shore. He sipped the Bloody Mary and let the pleasant thought relax him. Then he remembered the eggs, and he slipped them into the skillet, from the skillet onto the buttered toast. And carrying the plate, what's up with the wine and butter still? I guess he did cook.
I think he fancies himself a French trained chef.
Maybe so. I've never cooked eggs that way. There's a lot of ways to cook eggs,
I
though.
definitely would not cook eggs with wine. That doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah. The deck was 12 feet wide and built along the length of the east wall to catch the early morning sun. It was Barbara's idea that they could have breakfast on the deck. The sun had cleared the mountains and touched the house. It had dried the puddles of rain and water and warmed the deck, so Michael was comfortable in short sleeves.
Do we think the deck is hard?
I hope it's a hard deck. They had not yet purchased deck furniture. So he perched himself on the wide banister and finished the eggs. He could see the length of the front lawn from where he sat and slowed gracefully down the shore and the new pier. The pier he had built himself during the winter. One weekend he had come up to the village, bought 300 feet of lumber, hired 2 men from the construction firm, and driven out to the lake in a 4-wheel drive jeeps.
Yeah.
Along the shore of the lake, they found 12 sassafras trees that cut and trimmed and pulled across the ice to Michael's property.
Make me some sassafras soda.
That's right. Have you ever had sassafras?
Have not.
Yeah, we used to find the root of sassafras and sit there and chew on it. It tastes like
beer?
No, kind of like anise.
Licorice.
You know, like licorice flavor. Not too bad though. Kind of like licorice root, but more like root beer. Anyway, fucking ADD.
This episode brought to you by Barks.
By ADD. They chopped holes in the thick ice and sledgehammered the poles into place to make the foundation. And they cut 2x8 and 4-foot lengths and nailed them between the poles to make the pier. Michael's hands blistered and his back ached for a whole week. But he was proud of his hard labor and proud, too, of the pier that would 40 feet into the water, and he could easily handle his 2 boats. At first, he could not see the pier because the late morning mist clung to the shore. It rolled against the bank like a range of low clouds. But as he sat finishing his eggs and drink, the rising sun burned away the mist, and the thin slice of pier jetting into the mountain lake came slowly into view like a strange Gothic phenomenon. What the? Michael stood abruptly, and the whole length of the pier was covered with gray fungus. He looked around for more fungus, expecting to see it everywhere, and he scanned the landscaped lawn, the pine trees, which grew thick to the edge of his property. He spun about and ran to the length of the oak deck, leaned over the railing, and searched the high rear wall of the cabin. He glanced at the top of the trash heap of the construction materials left by the builders. No sign of the mold. Next, he ran into the house, and taking the few steps at a time to race to the second floor, he turned to the bathroom and flipped on the light. I read that like William Shatner. He turned. That's fine. I'm going with it. No fungus grew on the pine wall, and he turned immediately and ran downstairs, boot stomping on the wooden stairs, and opened the cabinet doors below the bar. The bottles of liquor were stacked as he arranged them. That's his biggest worry. Michael calmed down. He gained control. He kept walking, however, through the house, opening closet doors, checking cabinets, and he went again to the kitchen and looked through all the cupboards. He opened the basement door and peered into the dark downstairs. The basement has been left unfinished, a damp cellar, and he was satisfied there was no fungus in the house. He left the cabin and walked across the lawn to the shed.
No fungus among us.
And found a shovel, and he began where the pier touched the shore, scraping away the fungus and dumping the growth into the water, where it plopped and floated away. That doesn't sound smart. He shoveled quickly. The flat, tenacious flesh of the fungus ripped easily off the wood. It was oddly exhilarating work. In a matter of minutes, he had cleaned the length of the pier, and he stuck the shovel into the turf and went again to the house where he had found a mop bucket. Poured detergent into the bucket, filled it with hot water, and returned to the pier to mop the planks. The pier sparkled in the morning sun. And then Michael locked the cabin, backed the station wagon out of the drive, and drove into the village. The village was only a few streets where the interstate crossed the mountains. It had grown up on both sides of the White River and adjacent to the railroad tracks. The tracks were now defunct, and the river polluted. The few buildings were weather-weary and old, and the only new construction were the service station at the interstate and a few drive-ins. When Barbara first saw the town, she wouldn't let him stop. Barb. But the hills and valleys beyond the place were spectacular and spoiled, and when they found 5 acres of woods overlooking the lake, they decided that in spite of the town, they'd buy. I looked down at the pier, and the whole goddamn thing was covered with fungus. It's gray color, like someone's puke. Michael paced the architect's office, and he had already told the young man about the fungus in the bathroom and beneath the bar, and without saying so, implied it was the architect's fault. I'm not a biologist, the young man spoke carefully. He was unnerved by Michael. The man had barged into his office shouting about fungus. It had taken him several minutes to comprehend what the problem was. You're from the hills. You grew up here, right? You should know about fungus. What's all this mountain folklore we keep hearing about? Michael quit pacing and sat down across from the architect, and he was suddenly tired. The anxiety and anger over the fungus had worn him out. That's a new house out there. I sunk $50,000 into it, and you can't tell me why there's fungus growing on the bathroom walls? God damn it! What kind of wood did you use? Well, the lumber was green, true, but I told you we'd have problems. It was your idea to build a place with pine off your land. Well, pine needs time to dry. Still. The architect shook his head. The growth of fungus confused him. He had never heard of such a thing, but the man might be exaggerating, and he glanced at Michael. Michael was short and plump with a round, soft face and brown eyes, and kept widening with alarm. He wore new Levi pants and jacket and a cowboy boots that gave him an extra inch of height. Around his neck, he fastened a blue bandana into an ascot.
This guy sounds like a cunt.
Yeah. He looked, the architect thought, simply ridiculous. Well, who knows about this fungus? Michael asked. He had taken out another blue bandana to wipe the sweat off his face. In his exasperated state, the sweat poured.
Oh,
I guess someone at the college? And you don't think it's any of your concern? You stuck me for $10,000 over the original estimate, and now you've got your money. You don't give a damn?
Oh, burn.
I told you before we started construction that we'd get hit by inflation. We could have held the costs close to that first estimate if your wife hadn't wanted all those custom cabinets, those wardrobes, and items like bathroom fixtures from Italy.
Or the giant fucking fireplace.
Or the giant boulder fireplace. Michael waved away his architect's explanation. He was mad at the kid for not solving the problem of the fungus. Where's this college? He asked. Braley? It's across the mountain. How many miles? Michael stood as he had his car keys out and was spinning them impatiently. Maybe 30, but these are mountain roads. It'll take you an hour's drive. Why not telephone? You're welcome to use my phone. And he pushed the phone across the desk. Michael fidgeted with his keys, and he didn't want to let the architect do him any favors. But he also didn't want to spend the morning driving through mountains. Okay, you might be right. He sat down again and, picking up the receiver, dialed information. Yeah.
Hello? Information.
You remember that shit?
Yeah. 411.
Yeah.
I got the 411.
Okay, you might be right. And he sat down again, picking up the receiver, dialed information. It took him several calls and help of the college switchboard operator before he reached Dr. Clyde Bessie, an associate professor at the State University. Dr. Bessie had a thin, raspy voice, as if somebody had a hand to his throat.
Jesus. It's from all the fungus.
He said he was a mycologist in the Department of Plant Pathology. Do you know anything about fungus? Michael asked. Like I just said, I'm a mycologist in the Department of Plant Pathology. Why, yes, the doctor spoke carefully, as if his words were under examination. Mycology is the study of fungi. Then you're the person I want. You are.
I'm a very fun guy.
Says you.
Wee.
Then you're the person I want, Michael replied quickly. Then, without asking if the man had any time, he described the events of the morning. Phoenophora gigantea, Dr. Bessie replied. Huh? What?
Who?
The species of fungi you described sounds like Phoenophora gigantea. It's more commonly called resin fungus, a rather dull-colored species that spreads out like like a crust on the wood. You said like edges are serrated? Yeah, and it's lumpy. Rightly so. Phoenophora gigantea. Sometimes laymen mistake the species for crust fungi for the resinous secretion of the conifer. Does it grow like that? That fast? No, what you described is odd, and he sounded thoughtful. Fungi won't grow that extensively unless, of course, a house has been abandoned, and you're certainly not that fast. We did have a damp winter and spring, but still. You said the cabin was built with green lumber? Yes, I'm afraid so. Michael glanced at the architect. Still. Well, how the hell do I stop it? Michael was sharp because the laborious manner of the professor was irritating.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what to tell you. Your situation sounds a bit unusual. Fungi doesn't grow as rapidly as you've described. It's laboratory conditions. We've had fungus cover the surface of a 3-inch wide culture dish in 2 days, but that's like ideal conditions. Without competition from other fungi or bacteria, but generally speaking, fungi does thrive better than any other organism on Earth. And he said that with a flourish of pride. Doctor, I'm sure this is all just wonderful, but it doesn't help me, you see. I'm infested with this crap. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd like to drive over and take some cultures. I'll be able to tell more once I've had the opportunity to study some samples. You can have all you want. You've cleaned up the fungi, I presume, with soap and water. Well, that should destroy any mycelium. But then we never can be sure. One germinating spore and the process begins again. Rather amazing, actually. Let's hope that you're wrong. It's a $50,000 house. $50,000, man.
That's a lot of money.
What do houses cost now?
Back in the 40s, 50s, 60s.
Oh, I'm sure there's no permanent problem, just a biological phenomenon. Fungi are harmless, really. When they're kept in control, your home will suffer no lasting effects, and he sounded confident.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're right. Michael was cautious. Still, Dr. Bessie had eased his mind, and Michael hung up feeling better. Do you mind if I make another call? He asked the architect. Our phone hasn't been installed at the cabin. The young man gestured for Michael to go ahead. Actually, he wasn't that bad, Michael thought, dialing Barbara in the city. I'm sure it's nothing serious, Barbara said when Michael told her about the fungus, the wet weather and all. Barbara knows. Her mind was elsewhere, planning for the weekend. Did you have time to make beds? Damn, Barbara. I'm sorry. I had to run to the fucking town and deal with this whole scary gray fungus that's plumbing.
Barbara. Hi, Barb. Yeah, if you could get off my fucking nutsack for 5 goddamn seconds.
The whole pier was covered like a tropical jungle, Phainophoria gigantea. That's what the mycologist called it. The who? Dr. Bessie. He studies fungi. Well, if it's that well known, then it can't be any problem. Have you had any chance to wash the windows? Perhaps I can come up earlier. Don't worry about getting the cabin clean. I'll do that, Michael snapped at her. But he was upset that she hadn't responded. And Barbara had a frustrating habit of not caring about a household problem unless it affected her directly. I'll clean the windows, make the beds, sweep the goddamn floors once I get rid of the fucking fungus.
Oh.
And the rugs. I added fucking.
Okay.
I just thought it should be there.
I was like, wow.
I didn't stay too true to the story,
No,
but
fine.
it needed that fucking in there.
Yeah. You're picking up what Mike was putting down.
And the rugs. And the rugs. Michael, dear, there's no need to be upset with me. I have nothing to do with your fungus. Yes, dear. But you wanted the place built from our lumber, our green lumber. And you said it would make the place look more authentic. The lumber's green. I don't see why that's my fault. But it might you not hear what I just said.
Wanted it.
It might mean that we'll have to live in the goddamn fungus. Okay, Michael knew this was being unreasonable, but he couldn't stop himself. He was mad at her for not taking the fungus seriously. I'm sure you'll think of something, Barbara pampered him, and then dismissed the whole issue. You'll remember the windows. She sounded like a recording. Before leaving the village, Michael went to the general store and shopped for the week. He did not want to leave the lake again for errands, and he brought the Windex and the spices Barbara had forgotten, a new mop, a second broom, and he bought 2 5-gallon cans of gas for the boats and more fishing tackle. He bought a box of lures, good, he was only told by the store owner, for mountain lakes, and he picked up a minnow box and a fishnet and a fillet knife. And he would need them if he planned to do any serious fishing. Or you could just release them. Just say.
Or you could just eat the fungus.
Just catch them and release them. And eat the fungus. But he understood himself enough to realize also that impulse buying was only a compensation for the upsetting morning. So he was just, yeah, that makes sense. You don't do that. No, I don't do that. Now that he had the money, he spent it quickly, filing the station wagon like a sled with toys, and driving back to the cabin. His good mood returned. He could not clean the cabin that morning, he decided, nor would he make the beds. Instead, he'd take out the flat-bottomed boat and fish for bass in the small lagoon of the lake. And he'd pan-fry the catch that evening for dinner. He'd just have to fish some for, fish and some fresh vegetables, asparagus, or sliced cucumbers, and a bottle of Pinot Noir. Michael pictured himself on the deck frying the bass, in the cloud of smoke from coals drifting onto the trees, the late sun catching the glass of wine, the pale yellow color like tarnished gold. He'd cover the fish for a moment, stop to sip the wine, and look over the lake at the trees darkened on the other shore, and the mist formed. He'd get a thick ski sweater and put it on, and when the darkness spread up the lawn to the house, he'd be the last object visible, moving on the deck like a lingering shadow. Michael turned the station wagon off the country road and onto the drive, and the crunch of the gravel under the wheels snapped him from his daydream. He touched the accelerator, and the big car spun over the loose stones. On that side of the property, the trees grew thick and close and kept the house from view until Michael had swung the car into the parking space and stopped. Then he saw the fungus, a widespread growing across the rock foundation like prehistoric ivy. Ew.
Gross.
He ran from the car to the wall and grabbed the fungus. The mold tore away in large chunks. With both hands, frantically, he kept ripping away. Now it was wet and clammy, like the soft underbelly of fish. Gross. Michael left the fungus on the ground, left the new fishing tackle and other supplies in the car, and ran into the house, and he pulled open the cabin doors. The gray growth had spread again across the two shelves. It covered the liquor and grew thick among the bottles like cobwebs. In the bathroom upstairs, the patch of the mold was the width of the wall and stretched from floor to the ceiling, and it crept around the mirror, grown onto the wash bowl, and smothered the toilet. He reached out and pulled a dozen inches away from his fingers. The waxy flesh of the fungus clung to his hand. Michael fell back exhausted against the bathroom door and wiped the sweat off his face with the sleeve. It was hot in the cabin, and Michael took off his jacket and pulled off the blue bandana ascot and then started on the bathroom fungus. He filled 5 paper bags with the fungus and dumped them into the trash heap behind the house. And when he went to the bar, he removed the liquor, scraped the shelves clean again. He took the fungus to the trash pile and, going back to the car, got one of the cans of gas, poured it on the fungus, and started it ablaze. The wet fungus produced a heavy fog and a nasty odor, like the burning of manure. Michael watched it burn with pleasure. But he, yeah, burn, fucker.
Bitch.
But when he returned to the kitchen to put away the supplies, he found the fungus had spread, was growing extensively in all the cupboards and beneath the sink. It even lined the insides of the oven and grew up the back of the refrigerator.
Holy shit.
Michael needed to stand on the kitchen chair to reach the fungus that grew at the rear of the cupboards. But he had learned now how to rip the mold away in large pieces, like pulling off old wet wallpaper. Still, it took him longer. The fungus was more extensive and nestled in all the corners of the custom-made cupboards.
Gross.
He went outside and found a wheelbarrow and carted away the fungus, dumping it into the fire behind the house. The gray smoke billowed into the trees. The mountain air stank. He swept the kitchen clean and washed the cupboards, the bathroom, and the cabinets beneath the bar. It was late afternoon, and he had the house finally in order, and he went upstairs and flopped into bed, feeling as if though he hadn't slept in weeks. He woke after 7 o'clock, and it was still daylight, but the sun was low in the sky, and the bedroom was shaded by trees and dark. He had been deeply asleep when he came awake slowly, as if so it was several minutes before he remembered where he was and what had happened. And when he did remember, he realized at the same time that the fungus would have returned, that it was growing again in the bathroom, beneath the bar, in all the cupboards of the kitchen. But he did not know that now the fungus had spread farther and was growing along the green pine walls of the bedroom and spread over the bare oak floors and even started down the stairs like an organic carpet. Michael sat up and swung his bare feet off the bed and onto the floor, and his feet touched lumpy, wet fungus. And it was as if he had been swimming in the lake, and he had tried to stand on the mucky bottom, his toes dug into the slime.
No.
He shoveled the fungus off the floor and threw it out of the bedroom window. The shovel tore into the rough-hewed floor, caught a few planks of wood, and he ruined the floor when he was done. He took a rake from the shed and used it to pull the fungus off the walls. And he cleared the bathroom again and shoveled the fungus off the stairs. Repeatedly, he filled the wheelbarrow and dumped it outside.
Wow.
The fire burned steadily. And it took Michael 3 hours to clean the cabin. And only when he was done, resting in the kitchen, sitting at the butcher block table and drinking a bottle of beer, did he first see the fungus seeping under the cellar door.
Oh, no.
It grew rapidly before his eyes, twisting and turning, slipping across the tile floor like a snake, continued across the tile with life of its own.
This is like my worst nightmare.
You're right. He jerked open the cellar door to beat down the growth, but the gray fungus had filled the cellar, and he jammed against the door and when he opened the door, it smothered him in an avalanche of mold.
No.
Now it was everywhere. The cupboards burst open, and the fungus flopped out and onto the counter, and a tide of it pushed aside the food and shoved cans to the floor. In the living room, it grew along the rock fireplace and tumbled down the stairs, and it spread across the floor, came up between the cracks in the oak floors, and it grew around the tables and chairs and covered all the furniture with a gray dust cover of mold. It oozed from the center and rolled like a rolled-up rug, like pus from a sore. There was fungus on the ceiling, crawling towards the peak of the cabin, and it was under the foot. Michael slipped and slid as he ran from the house. The fungus crawled along the rock foundation. It filled the deck, and under its weight, the wooden supports gave way, and the deck crashed to the ground. The pier again was covered with the gray mold, came off the wood and across the new lawn, ripping the sod as it moved. It raced towards Michael like a tide. Michael got the other can of gas from the station wagon, and he went inside the house again and poured gas through the living room, splashing it against the house again, and poured the gas through the, He went inside the house again, poured gas through the living room, splashing it against the wooden stairs, the pine walls, and he ran into the kitchen and threw gas in a long yellow spray at the cupboards, emptying the last of the can on the butcher block table. And when he dropped the can on the floor, it sank into the thick fungus with a thud. He was breathless, panting. His fingers shook and fumbled as he found matches, struck and tossed them at the gas-soaked mold. Flame roared up, ate away at the fungus, caught hold of the pine and oak and walnut with a blaze. In the living room, he'd tossed matches into the liquor cabinet and set fire to the bar. He lit up the stairs, and the flame ran along the steps, and he tore through the fungus covering the furniture, ignited the couch. The fungus had grown deep and billowy. It was as if Michael was trying to stand on top of the deflating parachute. He kept slipping and falling as the lumpy surface changed directions and expanded. The floor was a sea of mold. The front door was almost blocked from view, and the gray smoke began to choke him. He tumbled towards the door, and the fungus swelled underfoot and knocked him aside. Michael found the shovel and used it to rip through the layers of wet mold. He cut a path, like digging a trench, to the outside, and he ran for the station wagon. The fungus had reached the parking space and lapped at its wheels of the car. Behind him, the cabin blazed. Flames reached the shingled roof and leapt to the frame siding, and the house burned like a bonfire, and he spun the car around. The wheels slid over to the slick mold like a car was caught on a field of ice, but he kept the station wagon on the gravel and tromped on the gas. The car fishtailed down the drive and onto safety of the county road. Michael drove for his life. It's a total loss. It's a total loss? Barbara asked again. I was wondering, where was Barbara in this whole thing?
Yeah.
It's a total loss? Barbara asked again, still confused by Michael's tale. Her blue saucer eyes looked puzzled. Michael nodded. In the rearview mirror, I could see most of it in flames. I didn't have the courage to go back and check. He spoke with a new honesty and a sense of awe. But to burn down our own home? Wasn't there some other way? She stared at Michael. It was unbelievable. He had arrived at the apartment after midnight, trembling and incoherent. I tried to keep cleaning it with soap and water, but it kept. He began to cry, deep, chest-rending sobs. She went quickly to him and smothered him against her breast. She could smell the smoke in his hair, the bitter smell of wood that had smoldered in the rain. A smoke? Barbara suggested. It will calm you down. She rolled them a joint. Her hands were trembling with excitement. They passed the joint back and forth as they sat huddled on the couch like two lone survivors. Michael again, and in great detail, told about the fungus and why he had to burn the cabin. I know you were absolutely right, Barbara kept saying to reassure him, but in the back of her mind, growing like a cancer, was her doubt. To stop her own suspicious thoughts and now insistent explanations, she interrupted. Darling, and she reached to unbutton his shirt. They did not make it to the bedroom. Michael slipped his hand inside of her blouse and then pulled her to the floor and took his revenge and defeat out on her. It was brief and violent and cathartic. Michael held her tenderly. Let's start there. Michael held her tenderly, arms wrapped around her, hugging her to him. He turned her head and kissed her eyes. It was all right, she whispered. He was home and safe, and she would take care of him. Yes, Michael thought, everything was all right. He was home in the city, and they would forget the mountain and the second home on the lake. He had his writing, and he had her, and that was all that mattered. and then his lips touched the candle gray fungus that grew in a thin, irregular patch more than 12 inches wide across her breast like a bra. So I guess the fungus came there too.
That was a lot.
That was a lot, but it was a good story. I appreciated the story. What'd you think of that story?
That was my worst nightmare. And I never want cold, wet, squishy things in between my toes. That fucking freaks me out for some reason.
When he was describing it, I was somehow picturing it like as fuzzy gray, like almost dusty. When you step in it, like more spores would come out, kind of a thing. But I guess it was more of a slime. And it was a very aggressive slime mold.
Worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Worst nightmare for me. Like, I can't.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one.
So, yeah, there's different kinds of horror, and that is horrifying.
Yeah, that's pretty horrifying. Agreed.
Although I feel like burning your house down instead of running away
That's a little much.
was dramatic.
Well, I think it needed some drama because the first half of that was kind of slow.
Then it got real bad.
Yeah.
All right, with that, thanks for
joining us.
Yeah.
And stay spooky.
No.
Wait, stay sheety.
Sheet.